Good evening or afternoon, fellow heretics. Doing the show a little bit early today. And the reason that is because our guest of honor is located in Norway. And if we did our typical time of 9 Eastern time, is 3 a.m. his time. So push it back a little bit earlier. I do. Hold on. Where's my thing? Yeah, before we bring him on, let's watch that
intro. Hold on to your butts.
All right. Just to get this out of the way, my kids are running around screaming behind me, so I'm super distracted. I'm trying to stay focused. Jesus. But our guest tonight is Dr. Matthew Monger, and Dr. Kipp Davis is helping me guest co-host. Dr. Matt, is it Matt or Mott?
Yeah, Matt. It's just a little joke with my name there. Mott is
like Dr. Kill?
Yeah, it's a Mott is like it's a northwestern Semitic god of death. So I just kind of try and play on Kipp's kill name. It sounds juvenile when I say it like that, but it just started sometime with Derek on Myth Vision and just kind of stuck.
Well, we got the god of death, and Dr. Kill, and we're my kind of people. Love it.
Yeah.
So Dr. Monger, do you want to take a minute and introduce yourself? Tell everybody where they can find you, what you got going on in the future. By the way, all the links to Dr. Monger and Dr. Kipp's social medias and academic works are all in the description below. Highly recommend checking them out and following them. So yeah, Dr. Monger, who exactly are you?
Yeah, so I'm Matt Monger. I'm associate professor of Near Eastern languages and literatures in Oslo, Norway, and I work with ancient Middle Eastern literature in different ways. I started out working with kind of Babylonian, Sumerian kind of stuff, and got more interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls when I was doing my PhD. So my PhD is on Dead Sea Scrolls and the Book of Jubilees in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And basically, my trajectory is that I'm just really interested in receptions and transmission of different ideas throughout the ancient Middle East. So I'm interested in the way old stories got moved from earlier contexts into the Bible, but also the way things in the Bible then get transformed and renewed and revised and edited into new contexts later. And so I'm just kind of, all over the place actually. But the one thing that kind of goes between the different things I work on is these ideas moving between different cultures, different types of literature to new contexts, and studying the way older traditions get renewed into newer contexts. So then that means I work with, Akkadian material. I work with the Hebrew Bible, work with Greek and the New Testament. I work with a lot with Syriac literature and the way they receive biblical traditions, work with Ethiopic literature and the Book of Jubilees. All kinds of stuff. So, and then I have a YouTube channel, Bible Monger, and the Bible was written backwards is kind of my thing that I am trying to sell, or trying to make a product to sell about. That just looking at the way all these older traditions that we have evidenced show up in the Bible, and the way the Bible is basically rewriting it at every step of the way something that's been there earlier. And so, yeah, I've done some stuff with the Babylonian stuff, and then right now I'm working on a thing on the laws. So I'm looking at the law, earlier legal traditions, and the way they get recycled, reused, readapted into the Hebrew Bible. So that'll be the next thing that's going to be coming on my channel. And then, I mean, obviously, other than that, I have a full-time job as an associate professor, so I do a lot of teaching and working, reading, doing, advising students, and trying to write grant applications and all this kind of stuff. So, lots of stuff going on all the time.
Yeah, you sound busy, man.
I am busy, but
which makes me even more flattered that you made the time to come on here and have this conversation with me.
Well, 7 o'clock on a Sunday is a good time for a busy person. So it's yeah. And it's already dark here. I don't know how it is at this point in the fall for the US, but now it's like we've gotten to that point in Norway where it's like, yeah, it's already dark at 6:30, and it's hard to find the motivation to go do other stuff. I mean, it's like this fall darkness sets in. So yeah, it's good to have other stuff to do.
I've always wanted to go to Norway. I've been to Macedonia and Iraq and Germany, a few other places. But Norway is one place I super want to go to. I'm jealous of all you people who get to live there.
Yeah. Well, come during the summer. It's much more fun.
Yeah.
Good to know. Dr. Kipp, how about you? You've been on the show several times before. Everyone watching probably already knows who you are, but what do you got going on?
A bunch of things. It's so I did a stream on Dapper Dinosaur's channel yesterday, and tomorrow I will be
missed
on.
Damn
it. It was fun. It was great because I could actually hear what was going on this time. The last time I was on their channel, the audio was so bad. It was yeah. Anyways, so yeah, I've got I'm doing another stream tomorrow evening with Reason to Doubt, and we're talking about prophecy, and with a closer focus, a narrower focus on messianic prophecy. And then I'm very excited that on October 27th I will be appearing on Potential Theism alongside Professor James McGrath, and we're going to talk about the latest word vomit screed by one Richard Carrier. So that'll be. I'm actually really looking forward to that one, mostly just because I get to hang out with James McGrath, which is pretty cool. But yeah. So, and then over on my own channel, I am just awaiting one piece of audio before completing my next video in my long form series on the Dead Sea Scrolls Unapologetically, which I think is going to be maybe the best video I've ever made. And I don't feel like I'm overselling this. I feel like I might have just lost my wad on this one project. Sorry guys. Ricky actually does voice work for this one. I have a special guest who's going to be. Do you guys want to can I share a teaser?
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to see it? Okay. So let me just but it's a secret. You can't tell anyone.
So it's a
I'll make sure this doesn't get posted live on the internet.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Everybody who's watching has to promise not to tell.
Swear an oath to secrecy.
Swear an oath. Can everyone see it?
Yep.
All right. Can you hear it okay?
Will come from the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Can hear it. Oh man. Oh, that's exciting. I know exactly what's going on there.
Yeah. I'm pretty excited about it. So, but that one's going on my Patreon here probably tomorrow. So, it'll be there for a little while and then published, I don't know, in a few weeks. But I will have another one coming out here this week as well. I've got a video all about the book of Daniel and Daniel manuscripts in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So
Nice.
Ooh,
yeah.
love Daniel.
So
Yeah, Dr. Kipp, for
I
those who
know,
don't
right?
know,
Pretty great.
on his on his Patreon, for his patrons, he gives them a chance to read some audio or create some audio reading some ancient scripts for his videos, and I've gotten to do that a couple times.
Yes, Ricky.
and it's very fun.
Ricky played the part of Eliezer Sukanik in
Nice.
in my last,
Yeah.
I think in the last video, and in this one, he voices Lamech, the father of Noah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Ricky's got range.
Yeah, it's fun stuff.
Yeah. I mean,
Oh,
I'm impressed at the range of Sukanik and the fictional father of Noah. That's
I know,
that's a pretty
right?
broad range there.
well, you've heard people be described as having velvety pipes. I have like Velcro-y pipes. So,
Velcro pipes. That's nice.
all right, so let's get the conversation going. Let me share my screen real quick.
My apologies for the one.
Did you just have sirens outside your window? Because I just had that.
It was
too.
his dog. It was a dog. Right?
It was my
Oh.
my miniature Manchester terrier who's whimpering. I think because my wife is. Oh no, she hasn't come home yet. So, but at some point she will, and mayhem will break out, and I'll mute my microphone for that.
Yeah.
That's all good. So this is I'm going to share my screen. This is a bit of an experiment. I'm using a different software to present these. I'm not sure how this is going to go. But the logos.
That's pretty great.
Yeah, it's not bad, right? So we're going to start there. We're going to talk about a lot of different places where it's used throughout ancient history, what it means. So, Dr. Monger, you're some of an authority on this. Can you settle the debate right here live on Nerds and Heresy, so that nobody has to debate this topic ever again? What does the logos mean?
Well, I guess I'm an authority because I made a video about this, so I appreciate the ascription of authority. That's a topic I'm actually working on, is how people get authority or how things get authority. I like that. But so I think the whole reason why it's worth talking about is because logos means so many different things in so many different contexts, and it did in ancient Greek philosophy. And it continued to do so in New Testament Christian understandings, and it continues to do so today. And so I think that's what makes it exciting. That's what makes it fun, that we have a concept that was super important in Greek philosophy in different ways for different philosophers, that gets received or appropriated or used or whatever in the New Testament, with whatever connotations would have been connected to it because of this Greek philosophical world that the Gospel of John especially was a part of. And then all of these later theologians up until today even have to deal with it because it's there as a part of the New Testament record. So, I mean, a long story short, the reason why we're talking about it is because in John 1:1, the gospel begins by saying, "In the beginning was the Logos," and so I pronounce it Logos. This is it's the European pronunciation of Greek, where I think some of my American compatriots might say Logos or something. I haven't been able to. I was trained in the European tradition, so I say Logos. But it's the same word, and Yeah, so now you've got that on the screen. So it says in the beginning was the word, and the word which is there is what is this logos term, and the word was with God, and the word was God, and he was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him, and apart from him nothing came. Blah blah blah. And the word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, and blah blah blah. And so the big question here is what is John actually talking about, right? And this is a question that I guess arises from a number of different perspectives, that has to do with the way we view literature. So I want to get like that out of the way before we start talking and debating about which philosophical traditions might be activated or might be understood in this text. One thing is that when we think about the construction of literature, I think of things that are written texts as things that are purposefully composed within a specific historical and literary context. And so when you get something like a word that is highly important in a Greek philosophical tradition, that just happens to show up in the first verse, in the very beginning of an important writing, then it's probably there on purpose. And it's not there, it's not just randomly used, and it's not used without any connotations. It's not just a neutral random term, but there's some sort of intentionality around it. And so it does carry more meaning than just saying, well, obviously this is just the word for word, and then all we need to do is just apply that label of word to someone, and then everything's hunky-dory. But there's a lot more philosophical baggage that comes along with that. And so then how do we define that word, right? This is the question that I think is the reason why people don't like to talk about this so much, because the original meaning of logos could be, it can be word, or it can mean like an utterance.
Reason.
It can also reason or logic, or I mean, even like the divine logic or the divine reason is something that develops within philosophical traditions. And so when we have all those levels of meaning to it, it tends to make people uncomfortable, and then we don't want to talk about it because we might be forced to take a side or to make a choice about what something means that will affect a large number of other things. And so I think I've even read about modern theologians that, I've talked about like how we need to get rid of the whole idea of the logos in reading John, because it's too tempting to read other traditions or other philosophical things into it. It's much better. It would just be to only talk about Jesus as being like literally the word of God. Then that's it. That's all you need to know. So I think I don't know how far back you want to go with this in the traditions.
Maybe we could start with like the history of the logos, where it started, how it kind of evolved, because the concept of the logos is much older than the New Testament.
Definitely.
It's first
and
used
so
by the
I think
Stoics,
Heraclitus
before the Stoics.
I think Heraclitus
Heraclitus,
uses it, and that's the beginning of the 5th century BC. And so we're really far back, right? So Plato and Aristotle do also use the term logos, but don't use it don't use it to mean anything out of, they use it in specific ways. Especially Aristotle uses the word logos to oh yeah, no worries. Kipp, should we just keep chatting, or we?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I'll pretend to be Ricky here.
You'll pretend to be interested. Is that?
Yeah.
But I mean, basically, the thing is that Aristotle uses it in a rhetorical sense, and so he's like, for him, it's the pathos and the ethos and the logos these are the different levels or parts of a text, right? And so when you're looking at the rhetoric, and so the art of convincing someone, the logos is the words, and then you have
Right.
like the pathos, which is the emotion, and the ethos, which is the ethics or whatever of it. And so you have these three sides that you're kind of negotiating and weighing differently to try and convince someone of something. So that's like the Aristotelian way of looking at it. But Heraclitus saw the logos as kind of a divine property that was something in between the divine or that came out of the divine but explained the human reason. And this is what the Stoics really picked up on. And the Stoics think of the logos as somehow a bridge between the divine and the human. And that's where, so from the 4th century, 3rd century BC, thank you. Ethos is credibility, yes, which I lack entirely.
Well, I mean, you're on here, so
yeah. But when we look at the development of the idea within the Stoics, and then especially towards what we call the Middle Platonic philosophers, it's this movement from logos just being something that's associated with the divine wisdom or divine knowledge, divine reason, to being the thing that mediates between the untouchable, unsaleable divine, which is by definition can't be corrupted, and which then is able to communicate something of reason to the human. And so that's where we kind of get this, I guess it's a bridge in philosophy, because I mean at this point when we're in I guess this early stage of Greek philosophy, we're still negotiating what it means to have a divine reality, a reality that's uncorruptible, and a human reality that's corruptible. And I guess that's I don't know, most of theology and philosophy is in some way rooted in this problem that one wants to imagine that there is something that's uncorruptible, and then how does that have any bearing on us, which are corruptible, quite obviously from the room I'm looking at right here. And so the corruptibility of the human is a problem, because anything that would touch the divine then would corrupt the divine. And so then you need this principle that can mediate in a way between the divine principle and the human corruptible nature. And really it's sorry, I'll just keep rambling if you don't stop me.
Sure. The logos is always like in studying the logos, how it's changed, how it's used over hundreds of years. It always seems like Batman's utility belt. Like it's always like this convenient way that's deployed to it. Like, we have this problem that we can't explain. Thus the logos, and like Batman. I have this on my belt. It just so happens. Yeah, it's kind of like the logos is deployed to explain things that it couldn't be explained. It's like the divine glue, kind of is how it's used.
Right, and
is that fair to
say?
And
it's well, it's a divine. I mean, it's like the divine duct tape. You know, it's when something doesn't quite fit together, you can just tape it up, and then all the holes or all the whatever leaks you might have, they'll it'll be all right. They'll hang on. And that's the wonderful thing about that kind of term, is that then it gets filled with whatever meaning the tradition or that philosopher, whoever's using it, wants to put in it. And so it's a really malleable term that can be, take the shape of what the traditions need it for. And that's why even in someone like Heraclitus, who's very, very, very early, is using it, but that we get to the Stoics pick up on this, and they see that it's valuable. And then when the Middle Platonics, the Neoplatonics, so we're talking like the up towards the turn of the era and then into the first few centuries AD, the Greek philosophers do then keep using this term completely disassociated from the fact that it gets used in the New Testament. So there's a continuing growth and use and change and development of the term logos straight through the philosophical traditions that doesn't necessarily stop because there is a new way of using it in the New Testament.
Hey, I'm just thinking as you're talking through this, Matt, is there a possible conceptual connection being made at any point here between this Greek idea about the logos and like Semitic ideas about conceptions of purity?
Well, so I've thought a lot about this, and I don't like. So I do think that there is something there about the conception of why we need a logos and why we need something to to mitigate the problems of purity in the Semitic tradition. And so I think that I think this is probably is just an older, more common understanding of the divine as needing purity or as being untaintable or something like that. I mean, because this is, I mean, the reason it's such a concern in the Hebrew Bible is sometimes a bit obscure, right? So purity is absolutely one of the biggest concerns, but it's a little bit difficult to understand whether it's because it affects God, which surely it can't according to theology, or whether it affects man in their pursuit of God, which it also seems to not actually matter if there are ways of avoiding or reversing impurity. And so it seems like there's some sort of a deeper connection there about what it means to be impure and to be then coming close to God. It's the two are incompatible in some way. And so, I mean, and obviously this is kind of where we're headed with this discussion, is that in the Semitic tradition, it's actually, it's wisdom. It takes that mediating role, right? That it's not necessarily the word, but it's the wisdom. And so this is something that that obviously this is where the Proverbs 8 thing comes into the connection. We'll get back to that in a minute. But also absolutely. I think, and that's why I'm really glad that you're here, actually, Kipp, is because this is also something in the Dead Sea Scrolls that we see is that wisdom is really growing at the time.
Oh yeah.
So the idea of wisdom as the I guess what you call upon or what you search for as a means of avoiding the problems that come with being human is in a lot of ways that it seems to be that kind of super glue or that duct tape kind of thing. We find all these wisdom texts, and I don't think it's just there because people are like, hey, make me wise. Like, it's not about that, but it's about the fact that wisdom in itself has some sort of value, has some sort of characteristics that's valuable.
Yeah, the wisdom in like Jewish way of thinking and the logos and the Greek way of thinking, they kind of mesh together pretty well when reading all the different literature where those two things are mentioned.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No worries. You've got your own little wisdom running around there.
Oh man, my own little infuriation, more like.
Yeah.
Boys, go do something, please. Anyway.
Yeah. But so, like, I mean, to kind of then build this bridge in, I mean, I guess you said you might have something from Philo that you could show, and I think this is one of the things when I was really doing my background work on this and reading Philo of Alexandria again, thinking about this, you really see that I mean, I think like it's it's so clear that Philo is the one who's doing this work, bringing the Logos into the Jewish tradition. So here's one. For it was impossible that anything mortal should be made in the likeness of the Most High God, the Father of the universe, but it could only be made in the likeness of the second God, who is the Word, the Logos. And I mean, this is really, I mean, this is really, really telling. I think when we look at the way John uses the term Logos, and then and there's another quote. I don't know if you have this one from Philo, where Philo actually equates the Logos with the Son of God. And so I mean, we're like we're so close to the ideas that we find in the Gospels. And here we have a scholar who is literally like just the generation before Paul and the gospel writers, right? I mean, we are so close to being at the same time. So this is what's going on. And so Alexandria, and I was there last week in Alexandria. You know, this was the intellectual capital of the Roman Empire. You know, and this, I mean, the Alexandria was where things were happening, where philosophy was being done. And it was a huge place. And so the fact that Philo, a Jewish philosopher, a Jewish thinker, brings with him the traditions of Judaism. So he writes about Abraham and Moses and the law and all this. So he's fully versed in Judaism, but he also then writes about these philosophical ideas and brings this Greek philosophy into the Jewish world. And the fact that he sees so clearly this connection between the kind of the untaintable God and the fact that corruptible humans must be created through it. How does this happen? And obviously it's through the Logos, it's through the Word. And he makes this connection also to the creation account then. And this is exactly what John is doing. Like when John says, you know, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John is, or you know, at least the writer of this passage is really playing on the creation story, and it evokes the language of the creation account, and it gives you an understanding of how this divine being that shouldn't be able to make sinful, horrible, failable things could have done it because the Word was there. And then building that bridge into the story of Jesus is where this kind of literary masterpiece happens. And it's but then the question is, how do we understand that word Logos when it's used like that?
So real quick, this is a good time to kind of mash all this together. Let me pull up my thing. Yeah, you have Genesis 1-4. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then Proverbs 8, speaking of wisdom, this is wisdom herself speaking. The Lord created me at the beginning of his ways, before the works of old. And then you get to John 1-3. Oops, messed that up. Not chapter 1-3. In the beginning was the Word, Logos, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Yeah. You have three very similar accounts, but speaking of three different, maybe distinct beings. Right. And here you can kind of see how this idea is being changed and adapted over time. Right. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Monger.
And I think this is just like this. So from my perspective, this is exactly what you would expect. This is negotiation with what we think may actually be going on. Trying to within the philosophical or the theological model that you're working with, you're trying to explain, what do you actually think? Right. And so you have a Genesis 1 source text, which says, in the beginning, God created. And then you get to this Proverbs text and somebody's saying, well, wait a minute. How was this? Like, what was the action? who was doing what, and they're reading this wisdom into the creation story. It's something that obviously we could say, oh, sure, there's gaps in the story and there's possibilities that things, whatever, but like it's not there. It's not in Genesis 1, but it's written into it in Proverbs 8, and this shows us that there's a new context. There's a new theological, philosophical, cultural, whatever you want to call climate that is looking for ways of understanding things, and is using different terms and different ideas, and here the wisdom is that new context. And so that gives us a way of understanding the way people were thinking about creation at that time. And then when it gets to John, then, which is written in a Greek philosophical climate, it makes perfect sense that what happens is that it's not saying the wisdom or not just God, but saying, hey, this is the Logos that is there. And I mean, and this is very basic. This is what I would teach in my first day of a New Testament, Intro to New Testament course, is to say that there's, the New Testament is basically looking backwards at the traditions of the Jewish scriptures and whatever traditions were alive at that point, and they're looking downward into their own context, and each of the different books of the New Testament will have a somewhat different current context, and then they're all looking to make sense of what they've heard about Jesus. And so those three things are what we kind of look at as all the context of what's going on. So the religious, cultural context of the book of John is one of Greek philosophical thinking. And so it makes sense that bringing in the traditions of the Hebrew Bible, the traditions of creation, and looking at that through the lens of the current climate and trying to make sense of what they've heard about Jesus based on that. And then that's the product we end up with, is something that does say something about Jesus through the lens of Greek philosophy while interpreting the Hebrew Bible. And this is, it shouldn't surprise us to find it that way. But I think the fun part is then kind of asking the question of what is actually happening. Like what are we actually envisioning here when this gets thrown in?
So, Dr. Kipp, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, a couple things. I'm curious at the outset here, because I no longer have it. But how does the Syriac translator handle this opening to John's Gospel? Do you have it handy, Matt?
That's a great question.
1 second. I'll get it up.
I'll just sort of, as Matt's looking that up, I'll explain my curiosity about this, because the Peshitta is the Syriac translation of the Bible is probably our earliest like Semitic source language for how people were understanding the New Testament and translating it into a Semitic language. Syriac is a form of Aramaic, which is also fairly closely related to Hebrew. So right at the outset, my interest and my curiosity is how does somebody from a Semitic mindset handle that specific term? Logos.
Yeah, it's Meltho.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's exactly as expected.
Wait, Maltho?
Meltho.
Maltho? Okay.
Yeah, it's
say Maltho.
Yeah.
That's perfect. The word Maltho.
Yeah.
See that?
Sorry, almost.
I'm not a linguist.
So it's exactly as you would expect it. I think. So the only thing that's a bit No, I don't. Honestly, I don't think there's anything weird at all. So I think it's
No.
basically what they're doing is translating that just purely based on the semantic range of word.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's. I mean, I wouldn't know what else they would have chosen.
No. It's yeah. So I wanted to maybe mention something else, I think, which is relevant to this discussion too. In addition to the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of our earliest Jewish texts is a wisdom text known as Ben Sira or Sirach in the Greek, and I was uh, scanning it a little bit this morning in preparation for our conversation today. And of course, Ben Sira echoes the same sort of idea of what we see happening in the book of Proverbs, where this idea of wisdom becomes personified as a companion of God and attached directly to creation. I checked through the text too, just to see whether or not Ben Sira is ever playing off of this idea of logos, and he doesn't seem to be. So, like, he uses the word substantially throughout his text. I think I found 68 instances where logos is mentioned,
Really?
and
That's a lot.
virtually, but it's just I mean, in his usage, it seems just to be, the a translation of it's just word, right? It's just words that you speak to one another. And interestingly, there's a handful of texts in Ben Sira where he reflects back on to this personification of wisdom, which in Greek is Sophia, Chacham or Chokmah in Hebrew, and in all of those instances, you don't find any usages of this word logos, and I mean, there's a couple things happening here. On the first place, I think, well, I mean, that's obvious, that's natural, because he seems to have this restricted sense of the word logos as pertaining to. So he doesn't seem to have adopted this this Hellenistic idea into his own thinking at this point. And Ben Sira is writing in and around the very early 2nd century BCE. So this doesn't seem to have penetrated his thinking at this point. But then I had another thought, and I wondered if we could even read in what Ben Sira is doing as almost a quiet attempt to counter this the emergence of the logos within that we see much more fully developed in Philo. Has me wondering if there's anything intentional on Ben Sira's part to downplay that connection in terms of his teaching about wisdom and wisdom's connection to creation. It's interesting though, like he's still making this connection though between wisdom and what is spoken by God. Like I'll just read a little bit in Ben Sira, chapter 24. He says, "Wisdom praises herself and tells of her glory in the midst of her people. In the assembly of the Most High, she opens her mouth, and in the presence of the host tells of her glory." And then this is what she says. She says, I came forth from the mouth of the Most High and covered the earth like a mist. So what Ben Sira is doing is he's kind of merging these creation traditions you see in Genesis 1 and 2, where God is speaking everything into existence, but then wisdom is projected as part of that whole speaking process. But then into chapter 2, she talks about covering the earth. She's the one that covers the earth like a mist. I dwelt in the highest of heavens, and my throne was in a pillar of cloud. Alone I encompassed the vault of heavens and traversed the depths of the abyss. So yeah, it's an interesting sort of text.
Yeah, well, I mean, and so much of that imagery is just so clearly making sense of what's happening in Genesis 1, but by personifying the wisdom as the all the other things than some other concept of God, right?
Right.
And so what's interesting is that Jubilees goes the other way on this, because Jubilees ascribes all of these other things to angels, and says that every little thing that is mentioned in the book of Genesis that isn't obviously ascribed to God is an angel that is under God's command, that was created on the first day to do specifically that. And so I think there's I think that shows us that there was resistance to the idea of either the wisdom or the logos or whatever to being God or being part of God. So the Jubilees is definitely the most conservative there, like trying to say, hey, it's nothing godlike. It's not coming out of God. It's not part of God. These are subordinate beings that are doing what they're supposed to. So I think there's actually like a continuum there of the acceptance or adaptation into the new contexts. But one thing I did remember is that there is an interpretation of a couple of things that are in some of the Targums. So in some of the Targums, there is instead of writing the Lord's name, it says the memra of God, which would be
what are the Targums, real quick?
Word of God.
So the Targums are the Aramaic translations and explanations of the Hebrew Bible. So they're basic. I mean, they're basically translations, and we have several of them. So there are the most conservative are very straightforward translations that
like an Aramaic
just into the yes, basically the Aramaic Septuagint. And then you have this then a kind of a continuum again of more and more explanatory targums, where some of them fill in a lot of gaps and make a lot of exegetical remarks on the text and adaptations, and show us a lot about what people were thinking at the time, how they were interpreting and understanding the text. And one of those things, and I don't remember it offhand which of the Targums it is, but has in some places rewritten the name of God, which is not supposed to be spoken, with the term a term that would mean basically the word of God, or the almost the saying of God, the utterance of God, or something like that. And that also shows us that was a tradition. I feel like that's kind of in a similar vein with the thinking of the hokmah, of the wisdom, that it's kind of anything that proceeds from God but isn't God itself must be something else. And so even God's name itself is in a way something, it's an attribute that's beyond God. It describes God, but it's also not even it's associated but not completely the whole thing. And I mean, I think there's a lot of negotiations going on in this time with people related to the Jewish tradition of trying to make sense of what degree of holiness or purity or whatever does God have, and how do we avoid tainting it through different philosophical means. And that's what I think John is doing is explaining for us his understanding of where Jesus comes from. So this is one thing I've been playing with a lot lately in my mind. I dance around these things in my mind a long time before I say them, and then I go on YouTube and just blurt it out. So that's really probably the smart thing. But
The
so
future
I've
of
been thinking,
scholarship.
Speaking of which, real
yeah,
quick,
I mean, but I've been thinking a lot about
keep
this
going. But I
because
think I found that quote we were talking about.
But yeah, so for the, I mean, so what we have here, we have Philo, who yeah, right, for the father of the universe who has caused him to spring up as the eldest son, whom in another passage Moses calls the firstborn, and he who is thus born imitating the ways of his father has formed such and such species, looking to his archetypal patterns. And this is talking about the word, right? And so this is Philo making a claim that the word is like the oldest born son of God. And what is super interesting for me, and what I don't, and so because this is something I haven't said before, maybe Kipp will help me formulate it more eloquently. But so what I'm thinking is a lot of scholarship recently has been very clear about the fact that the Gospel of John knows Mark. This is something that's been back and forth throughout history, but basically now, a large number of Johannine scholars are saying that John has some idea of the structure of Mark, and is using it. And what's interesting is when you see the other two Gospels that we know of that also knew Mark and make use of it, what do? Well, the first thing that they do is come with an origin story. They want to tell you, where does Jesus come from? And that's what Matthew and Mark do. Matthew and Luke do. They give you stories of the birth, or the conception and the birth and the genealogy.
Virgin birth,
right? And this is what's in, right. I mean, yeah, we don't have to debate the fineries of these things, but but it's
topic for another stream.
Yeah, but it is clearly an effort by Matthew and Luke to explain where Jesus comes from, and I think that's what John is doing here too. Is doing his how do we know where Jesus comes from story, and except for John isn't doing it within the genealogically minded Semitic framework, but he's doing it within the Greek philosophical framework. And he's saying, how could something that we're going to argue in the following is God? How could we even begin that? And so then we get this introduction that says, well, this is the Logos. And this Logos was there from the beginning and was part of all creation. And this Logos decided to put on a human form and come be with us. And that's where we begin the story.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said.
So a lot of scholars think that on that John 1 through 18 was added later by a later scribe. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know if a lot of scholars think it was added later by a later scribe, but I think a lot of people think that it's an independent tradition that is included in the gospel.
Okay. Gotcha.
And so there's, I think there's different. I mean, and Kipp will have to correct me on this, but my understanding is that there are that it's more likely to have been something that was part of the composition, as being included wholesale as something that was previously or that was externally composed. But I'm not 100% sure on that. I know that there are people that think that it was composed specifically for this position and added, but I don't know the scholarship on that well enough. I hadn't really thought about it. I just my assumption was that it's considered a pre-Johannine hymn or some kind of thing.
Oh, really? So you think it was pre-John, not post? But you still think it might have been like a separate like creed that had been developed somewhat before it was tacked on to the beginning of John's. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it has a different life than the Gospel of John itself, but that is included because it forms a perfect beginning here.
Interesting. What do you think this was, if this was in fact like tacked on at some point, why do you think that was? Do you think that the author, John, whoever he may have been, or whatever scribe was compiling these together, who knows, did they think this just kind of encapsulated the Gospel of John really well, and that's why they added the beginning? Or yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean,
what do you think the reason is? Yeah. Not sure if I asked that question very well.
If I'm not sure I'm answering any of the questions you're asking anyway. So, so it's, I mean, my thinking is that this makes a whole lot of sense where it is. It makes sense for the Gospel of John to have some sort of an introduction that gives it an orientation towards the philosophical world, and that says basically this thing that we're talking about, this person, this God, this whatever he is, has an eternal existence.
Like literarily or theologically? Like it makes sense literarily or theologically?
Definitely theologically. And I think as a literary trope, I think it functions fine. I mean, it's like I think it transitions from a pretty clear hymn that is almost a creed. You know, it's saying things that are believed about Jesus. And then it says, oh, and by the way, this word thing that I've been talking about came and is now among us. Right. And then here's the story of that guy. Right. And so it functions great. Or I don't think it functions great, but I think it makes sense. There's a bridge that gets you there, and it works. But my feeling is that it isn't. It's too nice. It's a very different thing than, hey, me and Peter ran really fast to the grave. You know, it's at a different level theologically, and it seems to have a play on so many levels of things that it's not just a gospel text right here, but it's something.
What do you mean it's? What do you mean it's too nice? Like it's too organized or it's too refined? It doesn't.
It's
fit as well.
Yeah, I mean the language of it, the connotations that it gives. Sorry, Kipp.
I said it's lofty.
Yeah, it's
a good word,
and it's just really well written. It's a really nice piece of work, and then we kind of get into the Gospel of John, which then isn't as.
I guess we would see that transition then at like verse 14. I would assume. Okay.
Yeah.
Logos Arx Yeah, no, I think 14, which is where the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Because then right away in verse 15 you have the introduction of John who bore witness to the word.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So so the verse 14, and the word became flesh and dwelt among us, was probably original to the text because it flows much better with verse 15. And sorry, I'm trying to organize my thoughts on this.
Yeah, I am too, actually. As I'm looking at
it's really.
I didn't mean to throw you guys into a thing. I'm gonna pull it. I just want to pull up the text and look at it again.
But well, you did.
So
and here we are. So we're gonna deal.
Yeah,
with it.
we're here. So I mean the thing is that I mean, so verse 14 functions as a transition from this thing, because you so 1 through 5 is very clearly a high, lofty, hymn-like thing, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and he was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. And what has come into being in him was life, and life was the light of the people, and light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Right? This is the heart of it.
Yeah.
And then we transition to John, right? And so then we get this, well, there was this man who was sent, and it was John, and he came to testify to the light, so that all might believe. And he was not the light, but he testified to the light, right? So we have this thing. And then it goes back to, well, he was in the world, and the world came into being through him. And so there is this kind of jump back into this where, so 6 through 9, right, kind of goes on to this John thing. And then we jump back into he was in the world, and the world came into being through him, and the world did not know him. Right. And so suddenly we have these kind of layers of movement in the text where it's being adapted to its current position and making sense of it, but it's not entirely smooth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like there's multiple possible beginnings to this gospel.
Yeah.
Like you could start
I honestly think that it's very easy to envision the beginning of the gospel as just simply, a very simple statement. This is the gospel of Jesus Christ according to John, or whatever, and then saying this is the testimony given by John when the Jews were sent priests from Levites to Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" Yeah. I mean, it's not less abrupt than Mark. Basically, it's just kind of things happen, and you're kind of asking, where are we? Why are we adults? What's going on? It's very different than the structure of Matthew and Luke.
Yeah.
It jumps straight
but
into
I was going to say, but
what gets me is good, Kipp.
No, I was going to say, if we're also thinking about John as a solution to Mark, then I would think that the beginning in the hymn works towards that purpose.
Very right. Very true.
Which is just how I've come to see all the non-Markan gospels nowadays. Is just
that's fair.
Let's fix this abomination, otherwise known as Mark.
Yeah, that's very fair to say. What gets me is verse 19. Like, this could very readably, at least, be the beginning of the gospel. This is the testimony of John when the Jews sent the priests and Levites, because this is pretty much how Mark starts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it's like that's another possibility. Like, why do you have all this creed or this poem, and then all of a sudden it has this rough transition to narrative about John the Baptist? It's all about Jesus being the eternal Son of God, and in the beginning becoming flesh, and it's like, oh, by the way, there's John the Baptist too. He does these things. So it's like there's literally this awkward transition, which is one of the reasons scholars think this was a later addition.
Well, I don't think this is the thing. I still don't think that we think that the argument is that it's a later edition, but I think that it's composed separately.
Yeah, I think I'm not using my words correctly. Yeah,
yeah. Because I mean, I think like that's the thing. Like just to make clear, I think it makes very much sense where it is in the gospel, and somebody's driving a motorcycle outside my house.
They having a great time.
Yeah. But so what we see is that it makes sense where it is. And it was probably, but we don't know whether it was composed specifically for this place or whether it was included because it made sense in this place. But when we think of the way the structure builds up here, I think it makes sense to me that there was an existing hymn, at least the first few verses, that was adapted and used into the gospel intentionally as the beginning of the gospel, so that it's not taking a version where John is giving his version of Mark or whatever, like you said, but it's more like John is, or whoever's putting this together is really building a stronger rhetoric, I guess, by using this as the introduction instead of a birth narrative or whatever. But I think that I think that it's pretty clear that it wasn't composed by the same person as who wrote the rest of the book, and that's where that's kind of the important distinction.
I think so, and someone mentioned this. There it is. Wannabe Scholar. Yeah, there are some similarities between this and Philippians chapter 2, where God or Jesus existed in the form of God, but did not regard equality with God something to be grasped. But he humbled himself and took on the form of flesh and remained obedient even upon death on the cross. And God bestowed upon him the name that is above every name. That's what it says. Yeah. Sorry.
Well,
so yeah, there's some similarities. Like you see the creeds like floating around and developing in their own communities.
Right. And
by the time they get to somebody who can write them down. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think that's, I mean, so I think this is one of those things like we were talking about a bit earlier, is just, so one of the ways you can try and conceive of the difference between God and what people are able to perceive of God is by talking about God's name. And so that's something that's used in Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomistic history, is that the temple is the place where God has chosen as I don't know if I can say it in English. I'm trying to find what the words are. But what's the word, Skip? What do we say in English? But as a place of residence for his name. I mean, it's like for the. I mean, that's
dwelling.
Yeah,
it says it like in
all I can think of is like, Shekinah too, but
yeah, I know. But it's the residence or the place where God's name will live is the temple, but it's God's name. And so there's this name theology that develops in the Deuteronomistic history and the Deuteronomistic times that basically are saying there's something different about God's name than God himself. So the thing that can live among us on earth is God's name. And so that's one way of dealing with this.
That can be given to various people who are deemed worthy of it.
Well, I mean, so I guess that would be the argument. If you're trying to avoid it being super important, I'm not sure that Philippians is thinking that Jesus is of lower than God. I think they're specifically trying to make that argument in that if this is a pre-Pauline creed, which I think a lot of people think it is in Philippians,
it's pretty evenly divided. It seems like. Anyway, go ahead.
But like that the reason why it's there then in 2 verse 9, like this whoever said that that he's given the name above all names is to try and I'm not sure it's trying to play on a Deuteronomistic understanding and say that like, well, it's like the name, which is almost the thing, but it's like saying that he can even be called by God's name, and that's like then the big thing that you're not supposed to say or do or believe. And that's what, because I think early Christians did come to believe very quickly, or at least at some point, that Jesus was in some way God. I mean, that's the whole point of the New Testament, is trying to figure out how to make sense of that. And so those different levels, was he God's name? Was he God's word? Was he God himself? It took him 4 centuries to really, well, I don't know if it was settled in 4 centuries, but at least it took a number of centuries to figure out even how to deal with that.
Yeah, I think that's why there's so many connections with Jesus and like the wisdom. I've got another quote here I'd love to get y'all's thoughts on.
Yeah.
Oops. Where are you at? There you are. Boom. This is from the Wisdom of Solomon, not Songs of Solomon. Different book.
Right.
That did not make it into the Hebrew Bible. For wisdom is more moving than any motion. She passeth and goeth through all things by reason and her pureness. We talked about purity earlier. For she is the breath of the power of God and a pure influence flowing from the glory of the Almighty. Therefore can no defiled thing fall into her. For she is the brightness of the everlasting light, the unspotted mirror of the power of God, and the image of his goodness. Yeah, I don't even know what question to ask after reading that.
So
do you think that Jesus is being compared to a being like wisdom in Proverbs 8, Proverbs 5? There's another mention in Job 6 and other places, and Wisdom of Solomon. Do you think that like Jesus is being compared to this being?
Short answer, yes. I mean, I think that the imagery. So, I guess I would just say it in a different way. What I think is that one of the reasons why the bridge was able to be built so easily in New Testament times is because the groundwork was already done in Second Temple Judaism, and so we have these notions of the wisdom that is very closely connected to God and God's attributes, but that isn't God himself. And I think that what happens then when we get into this Greco-Roman world where we get different words, where you're using the Greek language and all these kind of things are in play, it's very natural to think that Jesus then is then being described in these terms.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was their understanding, was that he was God-ish. And yeah, I mean, I think that's where it starts, right? I mean,
no, I think yeah, you're right.
I think this was what's going on. The negotiations of the first, especially the first century, are how much God is Jesus supposed to be.
Yeah, that's true. Wow.
I think we lost Ricky though.
We did. He got swallowed up.
I understand why he doesn't like to do these things in his afternoon.
Yeah.
Sorry, what did I miss?
I mean, I answered your question very, very well, and everyone agreed, so we moved on.
Oh, I'll have to go back and rewatch.
No, so basically, all I said was that I think that I mean, all these texts that come out of Second Temple Judaism lay the foundation for the reason why people were able to accept so readily that Jesus was God-ish. I think is the way I said it.
God-ish was the word. Yes,
God-ish was the word,
God-ish.
because I think there's this is what they're negotiating. They're trying to figure out, right? So this is one of those things that Bart Ehrman has said that I really, really appreciate and actually feel like is something that is really interesting and people should take more seriously. Is making sure we get things in the right order when we think about how the Christian movement started. And what we don't have is a whole bunch of texts and then people reading them and interpreting them. What we have is an experience. And people are saying, Jesus came back to life. That's the end. That's what happened. And then people start to say, how is that possible? And then they spend 20, 30, 40 years, 50, 70 years negotiating this, trying to figure it out, and then they write. And so the 20 years that Paul doesn't do anything after he sees the resurrected Jesus, right? What's he doing? He's trying to figure out what to say. And what's happening is there's a movement from saying, dude, that was Jesus, to saying, wait, maybe Jesus was divine. Because the only people that could come back to life in that way had to be divine. And then you say, well, what kind of divine? What does it mean to be divine? And that is the process that's going on from 30.
And back then, that could mean all kinds of different things.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we see these kind of things. And so the big thing then that is important with the discussion we're having now is that we see that the work of Greek philosophers, but especially the Second Temple Jewish writers, is laying a foundation that could be built on, because you could say, well, maybe he was divine in the way the Logos is divine. Maybe he's divine in the way the wisdom is divine. Right? And so they're working through the options and giving themselves different ways of interpreting it. And in the end, of course, we end up with pretty, orthodox understandings or whatever. Mm-hmm. But there's a kind of a foundation there already. And so it's the negotiation of what they're trying to say. We think this is real, with how do we, within our understandings of the world and the way humans and divine work, how do we make sense of it?
Yeah, that's something I try to talk about a lot is Christians today have a very Western Orthodox black and white way of thinking when it comes to divinity. Like John 1:1, Jesus was the Word, and the Word was God. Boom, that means Jesus was Yahweh. No. There is a myriad of possibilities as to what that actually means back at the time when the authors were writing that sentence. It could mean all kinds of different things. But we can't think like that anymore because we're so westernized.
It's inherent in this. It's an inherent problem in this. It's inherent in the problem with this term monotheism, right? Which is just a completely foreign concept as far as we conceptualize monotheism, even in the Second Temple period. It's so much more convoluted and complicated than just that.
They would try to reconcile, like, worshiping multiple beings like Jesus and the Holy Spirit and God, and try to reconcile that with still being mono. That's why the concept of the Trinity was developed, to solve that problem. Like, we want to be monotheistic, but we still want to recognize Jesus and the Holy Spirit as something separate from God. So how do we do that? So you have like 300 years of like Irenaeus and Tertullian arguing with each other, or arguing with other theologians, trying to figure out how to rectify this problem. It's so much more complex than we tend to think.
Things are usually more complex than we like to think. I think that's like the bottom line of everything, and that's why people tend to get frustrated when you try and give good explanations too, because it is complicated, and there's always going to be multiple facets that we don't even see or know and so we need to work through things many times before we get to the point where we're actually able to, see relatively clearly what things might be, and then something new could arise, and we have to be willing to renegotiate and reevaluate that.
Yeah, just look at going back to the Logos. Here's a list of all like mentions of the Logos over the course of like 100 years. These are all quotes from early church fathers talking about the Logos. Some of them saying, Jesus is not the Logos because Jesus is better than the Logos. He like supersedes the Logos. He's something different and better and superior. And then you got like Origen who's saying, no, he is the Logos. We just don't understand the Logos correct, but he is. So you have all these varying opinions. Spanning 300 years after Jesus' death. They still don't know. They're all trying to figure it out. They're all leaning on their usually philosophical education, because a lot of them were prior Stoics or prior Neoplatonists. So they're all leaning on that education to help them explain this problem. And they're all arguing with each other.
Right. And that's one of those things too. Once, after Plotinus, and the Neoplatonists really take over Greek philosophy, then the idea of what the Logos is obviously changes somewhat, and that makes then theologians more reluctant to identify the Logos with it. And so as changing contexts come along, people say, no, let's not let that be it. And that's why, like what I mentioned earlier, when you hear modern, scholars or modern theologians talking, they'll be like, don't bring Greek philosophy into the mix. This is a very bad thing. John could never have been corrupted by Greek philosophy. Ooh, bad.
Yeah, Greek philosophy is like the backbone of modern theology. That's where 90% of this came from. Maybe not 90%, but
Yeah.
So there's one other mention of wisdom that I wanted to bring up specifically. I think you, Dr. Kipp, will have something to say about this, but it's a bit different from Proverbs chapter 8. It's in Job 28. It says, "Where then does wisdom come from, and where is this place of understanding?" Hold on. Apparently my kids locked themselves out of the house. Feel free to read that for me.
It is hidden from the eyes of every living creature and concealed from the birds of the sky. Abaddon and Death say, with our ears we have heard a report of it. God understands its way, and he knows its place. For he looks to the ends of the earth. He sees everything under the heavens. When he imparted weight to the wind and assessed the waters by measure, when he made a limit for the rain and a course for the thunderbolt, then he saw it and declared it. He established it and also searched it out. Yeah, that's interesting. So, like, this
It's
is
like Yahweh sought after wisdom and then captured her.
Yeah.
It seems like it's saying.
Yeah,
what do you think, Dr. Monger?
It's a slightly different sort of conception of this connection of wisdom to creation compared to what we see in something like the Book of Proverbs or in Ben Sira.
It's not something that came from God. It's something that God apprehended and made a part of himself. In this passage, since it's Job and it quite possibly dates to earlier than Proverbs.
I want to look
who knows?
Well, I don't know. The date of Job, I think, is the hardest piece of work that's left in the Hebrew Bible, honestly.
Sure enough.
Yeah.
But so I don't know if I read this completely as God apprehending wisdom, but I'm I mean, the way I mean, just the way I read the dialogues in general.
Please tell me if you think I'm wrong, please.
Well, so what I think is just that a lot of what's going on in Job in these dialogues, it has to do with God basically saying, "You don't know shit."
Yeah.
And so Job trying to claim his wisdom, or trying to prove his wisdom, is trying to prove his value, trying to prove his his law abidedness, and all of his obedience, I guess is the word, and all of these things that that Job kind of keeps arguing for, and God keeps coming back and saying, "You don't know shit," and that's kind of like this thing. And so I wonder if God here is more saying, or this, where this passage is saying that there is nowhere else wisdom comes from. It literally only God is the only source of wisdom, and so it's just kind of a rhetorical way of saying it. And it's just like, because when we move on, a little later in Job, then you have that whole, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth, and where were you? And it's kind of like this, come on, Job, don't be an idiot. You know what's right here. But that's, I mean, that's just that's my kind of off the cuff reading of this.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, this passage has puzzled me for a while, but I can't read it in its original language and context as well as you guys can. So yeah, I always felt like I didn't know if I was reading this correctly or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's
it's not always the same in English.
No, I mean, so my understanding is kind of basically saying, like, God had the wisdom all along, and it's like, and all of these things that you could, in a way, think, how could you ever get it right? It's almost like an argument to fine tuning. It's like, how could anyone ever get all these things right? Exactly the amount of waters, and the exact amount of energy for a lightning bolt, and the exact amount of this or that, and then it's kind of like, well, God is the only answer. Is what's kind of they're rhetorically trying to make you say. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah, that what's the translation of that, Ricky? Where's
This is
that from?
the NASB,
Oh, okay.
New
'Cause it's
American
like,
Standard Bible.
Yeah, I'm just looking
It's
at
probably
the
not the
last.
best, but
Well, Job is hard, right? Like, it's not especially simple Hebrew in Job, so this lends to a lot of the difficulties with it. But yeah, as I read in particular in that last verse, in verse 27. Like, as I look at that more closely, I don't think this is God looking for and finding wisdom. These are all expressions of, like, possession as I read it. So even something like the verb ra'ah, like, that's the first one. Then he saw her. What is it saying? Yeah, he saw it, or he saw her. He accounted it, he established it, and then also sought, but that's more like that's a chakar, which is more like exploration. These are all, to the way I see it, these are all like expressions of, I guess, God's possession and wielding of this thing, right? That we call wisdom.
Well, and then the following verse, which you don't have on there, I think is
28,
which says,
Yeah.
and he said to
Oh.
humankind, truly the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to
Yeah.
depart from evil is understanding.
Is understanding. Yeah.
I think that's kind of the conclusion of that whole rambling, is to say the fear of the Lord is wisdom. And then we're back in Psalms, right?
Yeah.
that was I had a teacher once who always wrote that on his tests that he gave us, was the fear of the Lord is the
fear of the
beginning
Lord
of
was the
all.
beginning of wisdom.
Yeah, and so every
Yep.
time I failed a test in his class, I would circle that.
Was that at MF?
Oh man.
No, this was in high school.
Okay. Right.
I did I'll never forget this. I took a test in Bible college, and I forget what the question was, but I didn't know the answer. But I was like, I wrote, I don't know the answer to this, but I can draw a snake. So I drew a snake on the like blank because I was just like, yeah, I'm fucking around. And he gave it back to me, and he wrote, "That's a nice drawing of a snake," and he gave me like half credit for that question.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Nuts.
Never know unless you
Yeah.
try. If you don't know the answer, draw a picture of a snake. It might. You
That's-
don't know. It might work out in your favor.
Who knows?
You
what
never
happens,
know.
right? Yeah. You never know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And to mankind, he said, "Behold, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and to turn away from it, or to turn away from evil, is understanding." Yeah, I probably should put that in there. Yeah. Cool. I'm trying to think. Did I have any other questions I wanted to present? No, I think we kind of covered everything. By which I mean we barely scratched the surface of all this.
Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but it's I mean it's a fun topic. It's and these are the kind of things that I'm sure some of our less friendly compatriots on YouTube will have a lot of fun making videos telling us how stupid we are for a lot of the things we say, because these are
Agreed.
I mean a lot of this stuff is I mean it's stuff that we can talk about and we can discuss, but in the end, like, we're not in the mind of the composer of the Gospel of John or Philo or anything. And so all we can really do is read the text and try to make sense of the way these things play on each other and fit into specific contexts. And at the end of the day, like, there's just so much we don't know, that it's fun to talk about. And I really believe there is very clear connections here between the use of the language and the Greek philosophical traditions and things like that. But then, like, what first readers and writers would have understood with that logos and all these kind of things, there's so much that we just don't know.
Hey, I maybe have another question here. How much do you think this is this is a regional idea or concept? Like I with in the connection of Philo in this Alexandrian Judean tradition, and then in the I mean, a lot of it is just happenstance in terms of our manuscript preservation, but it's striking that so much of our early gospel manuscript material is Alexandrian, and it's John, right?
Yeah. Just give me 1 second, guys.
Sure.
Oh dear.
You have a super chat.
Someone's coming through his roof. I do have a super chat. I'm afraid to bring it up right now because he clearly had a thought. He wanted to.
Yeah. Sorry. My kid wants to make food, and I have to communicate that that's fine.
Yes, the answer to that,
the answer to that is yes. But anyway, so I've thought a lot about that too, because I mean, Kipp knows me well. I think you bring up stuff because I don't know if you bring it up because we think so much alike, or because
I think it's because we think
know
alike.
Me. But it's, I mean, I definitely think in terms of materiality and historical reality. And so I don't like to talk about things as though ideas pop up in Alexandria and then they're simultaneously known in Antioch or in Patmos or wherever you want to be. And so I think it is important to think in terms of who could know what and how can things be connected. And so I had a conversation with a colleague about this, about whether we think that John actually knew Philo, right? And that's one of those things that it's also debated, because we how could we know if John knew Philo, right? It would make things a lot easier if there were some clear reference to Philo. But so let's assume then, yes, let's assume that somehow John knew of the tradition from Philo, or the composer of this knew of Philo's traditions, whatever. Okay, it's not completely crazy to think that the manuscripts of Philo made their way to other places in the Jewish diaspora. But it's also not crazy to think that intellectuals who learned Greek were in Alexandria at some point. So being exposed to ideas of Philo or to other like-minded people is entirely plausible. And whether it happened directly through manuscripts, text, or just through somebody having read and experienced that kind of the teachings of Philo in Alexandria and bringing them back to a Johannine community, I think there is a historical reality that's possible there, given what we know about the travelings of intellectuals in that time.
It also doesn't have to be real quick, Vesper. I'm gonna get to your super chat. It could also be so one connection a few people have made, and I don't know if it's a case of parallelomania, but the Bacchae was a play, right? You don't have to be literate. You can go see a play. And here you have Bacchae, the son of love, and come to the land of Thebans, who formerly Semele, the daughter of Cadmus, brought forth delivered by the lightning bearer flame, and having taken a mortal form instead of a god's, having danced and established my mysteries, that I might be a god manifest among men. I have changed my form to a mortal one, and transformed my shape into a nature of a man. Go ye Bacchae, escort Bromus, a god, the son of a god. Right. So you see these types of this is something you didn't need to be able to read any manuscript. You go see this play, and now you're like, oh, everyone's familiar with this idea. This is popular among the illiterate. So it would be easy to maybe transfer this into our new theological religion.
Sorry,
no, can't
totally
organize
right.
my thoughts.
I totally get it. Yeah, because I think, Euripides is a good example of the way things were being done on stage, right? That's such an important thing, because again, I hate the idea that something's
400 BCE. By the way,
right,
quick.
and is definitely presenting. So the thing is that I don't like the idea of things being in the air. So, but being on stage is then making these things known to many people. But we don't even need to go that far, because so I think that it is great that Euripides is there and that we have these kind of connections. But the people that wrote Gospels were highly literate. And were very good at what they did. They might not have, in all cases, written the level of Greek that we might think that the best composers did or whatever. But these are people that knew traditions, and they were literate, and they were able to write. And if we can just move beyond this illiterate fisherman narrative of the gospel writers being the disciples that then we're into a realm where people had gone to school, they had learned to write, they knew about traditions, and they composed their gospels on purpose and related them to the worlds that they had been educated in. And so it's not as great of a leap as people would have us to think it is. And then they knew all kinds of stories about sons of gods and taking and gods taking human forms, and gods going down and impregnating women and their sons doing great deeds. And there's it's not an issue really when we just assume that gospel writers read and then composed their epic stories about Jesus within the framework of the literary types that they knew.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest gripes against my fellow atheists who say the Bible's just a bunch of ancient sheep herders. No, they weren't.
No.
These people were very, very well educated. They were very smart. They knew what they were talking about.
Yeah.
Every passage is written with intent. The authors of the Gospels
is brilliant.
No Greek better than
right?
Paul did. Yeah. So yeah, it's these people weren't dumb. They were just in a religiously saturated culture, I guess, trying to figure out their own.
This one that I
theology.
have encountered more recently on TikTok, or not TikTok, on Twitter is the Bible is a fairy tale. Therefore,
yeah, that drives me crazy too.
You can't it's not reliable as a source of history. It's just it's just such an impossible dichotomy to make with regards to this literature, as if the Bible was ever a thing until hundreds of years after all of these texts were written.
Don't get me started. Okay, on to the super chat before I go on a tangent. I have a lot of problems with the way my fellow atheists talk about the Bible, and I could talk about that forever. This pre-existent Jesus, again, thank you Vesper for the super chat. This pre-existent Jesus appears related to Adam Kadmon, a sort of perfect platonic image of a man made of divine light, which Philo alluded to. Thoughts? I'm not familiar with this.
Yeah, this this is one of those. This is one of those reasons why we can absolutely say that Philo is a Middle Platonic philosopher, because it's playing on the forms, basically the Platonic forms, which for those who don't remember their high school philosophy courses, that's, basically Plato's thing was that there are these forms.
In high school?
Didn't everyone?
Is that an option?
I don't even know if it was offered at mine. But yeah,
and no, it wasn't at mine either. We just learned about Jesus, but anyway,
right.
But I was trying to be kind. I was trying to be kind, guys. It was, but anyway, so the Platonic forms are these kind of idealized ideas that exist of the things that the real world reflects basically the forms. And so the forms are the perfect thing, and then what we see around us and participate with in our human existence is only kind of the corrupted version of what the forms are in their perfect thing. And so this idea of the atom Kadmon, or whatever it is like the first atom. So it means the first atom, and this first atom is meant to contrast with the first worldly atom, I think, in Philo, if I remember correctly. So basically you have the atom of Genesis where he's made from the dirt and everything, but then we have this first Adam who was also just thought. It was only, and then it would be a kind of a form, a pre-existent form, for which then we can have the earthly reflection. And then that way you have this kind of bridge between the corrupted one and the form of it, because obviously being made in God's image is is still kind of a problem, because if humans are made in God's image and then God's image is corrupted, then what does that say about God's image? But then if we have this corrupted or have this form, then it makes more sense, because we can't be reflections of the form of God, but we can be reflections of the form of this first Adam. And then that makes us corruptible in a way, because had we been purely reflections of God as the first form, then we would have necessarily then been perfect, because any reflection of perfection would still be perfection. And so it's like, but then the corruptible nature can kind of come in at that second level, but not at the first level. So I mean,
wow.
So
Clearly,
I think
I need to read more Philo.
Well, I mean, Philo's fun, but also Philo is yeah, can be difficult.
He's a bit out there
and this is,
sometimes,
but isn't this exactly what happens to Origen in the end when Origen gets thrown out as a heretic? Is that wasn't Origen's whole point that that there was a pre-existing soul and a pre-existing fall, and so then there's like now I'm confused on my origin of the origins, but I think what happens with Origen later on is that he reconstructs the creation, also follows Philo, and kind of thinks of creation of a soul form that is kind of there in the beginning, and is separate from the earthly form. And then he talks about this kind of corruption of the soul that happens already there. So somebody's gonna have to, I guess, check me on that, and I'm sure I'll hear about it.
I'm not the guy to do that.
That does sound familiar, but that's the thing about like all the early church fathers who like were pinnacle in the shaping of modern orthodoxy. They all had some wild out there takes that don't get talked about, don't get referenced. They say some batshit. Who was it? Not St. Augustus of Hippo, right? We talk about St. Augustus of Hippo all the time. But he claims he saw cyclopses in South Africa. Like he claims he saw people with no heads and like eyes where their breasts should be. He was like, yeah, I saw these people walk around with no heads and eyes on their chest, and there was also these people with one giant eye in the middle of their forehead. He's like, yeah, I saw that.
Saturday Night Live sketch,
like,
isn't it?
Yeah, sounds like some ancient season 0.001 of Saturday Night Live. But like all these early church fathers, they had these. They get leaned on very heavily by like Orthodox priests and pastors and apologists, etc., Christian scholars, but they all have these wild out there, statements that they tend to ignore. So I can totally believe that about Origen. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he has like some idea about like pre-existing baby souls and how they jump into you when you're born and stuff like that. So there's somebody can go look it up. I'm sure there's you can find an Origen scholar to interview about that. But oh man, all right. Well, this has been very fun. We got about 10 minutes ish left. Do y'all have any final thoughts before we close out the stream? Dr. Kipp?
No, I am. No. I have exhausted my my reservoirs on Philo.
Yeah, my brain's pretty fried too. This subject chat you guys watching is so incredibly complex. It's exhausting to think about for 2 hours straight. I agree. I feel like my brain is being pulled in several different directions because I want to think about so many different things at one time. But that's kind of the point of this is Christians today talk about theology and biblical doctrine and orthodoxy like it's this black and white thing. Believe this, nothing else. Everyone else is lying. You believe this. No. When these texts were being written, nothing was black and white. It was very subtle shades of gray to these authors. So when you try to go back and think the way that they're thinking, interpret these texts the way that they're writing them, it's a whole different thing.
Yeah, and there's just no doubt that every step of the way things also became black and white. And so there's that's the thing, is that everything is incredibly complicated, but then at the next step things were turned around and became you're in or you're out, this is right, this is wrong, about minutia. And so there's just it's just so complicated as we move through the centuries, trying to make sense of what was going on, what were the theological climates that were shaping things, what happens, as we move away from 70 AD and the destruction of the temple and the diaspora, both of the Jews and of the Christians. How are people rethinking, renegotiating the traditions that they've had? How are new Christian thoughts being added? It's just so complicated. And then to know that we're bound up in that interpretation history because we've been told what these things mean or don't mean for, all of our lives. And it's kind of a never-ending spiral.
Yeah, like when Constantine conquered Rome, that's when he started. He didn't like ban other religions per se or other sects of Christianity, but he heavily favored the Orthodox Catholic. So he gave them land. He took land from the Jews, gave the land to the proto-Orthodox Christians. He gave them money, gave them tax breaks, gave them like court authority. So it was super in your favor to be Catholic. If you didn't want to be Catholic, then you were going to have a hard time. And my kid is walking behind me with underwear. What?
Well, that's better than not.
Yeah, it could be worse. Could be worse. That's true.
Could be worse.
Right.
Could be worse.
Could be
We
worse.
all have kids here. We know.
Yeah, it was very well you said, Dr. Monger. Like these ideas were kind of like bottlenecked and funneled into like one. Yep. And prior to that, it was all over the place.
So and that's not even to get into the other bottles, right? I mean, like there's bottlenecks in all different directions, right? It's like bagpipes, it's all different ways that things were going, and different writings of different church fathers are going to reflect that. And yeah, it's crazy, but I'm also pretty fried. So I've really enjoyed this though.
It's
good.
It's late in Norway.
Oh, you mean it's like 9?
Oh, it's getting there, right? It's almost 9, I think.
Almost 9 o'clock. That's that's my bedtime,
my
basically.
bedtime. Yeah.
There, yeah. and my kids clearly want my attention. So yeah. But perfect timing. We're at about the 2-hour mark. Thank you, Dr. Monger, so much for joining me. This was a lot of fun. Thank you, Dr. Kipp, for joining as well. Again, you guys in the chat, all the links to all their goings on is in the description below. Highly recommend you check it out.
Can I mention one thing that I missed?
Sure.
Dr. Joshua Bowen and I are starting to do like semi-regular Hebrew reading streams, and we're doing our second one this coming Thursday at 5:30 Pacific time, 8:30 Eastern.
After my bedtime.
4:30 a.m. Norway time, I think. No, it's like 2:30.
I was really sad. I missed the first one, so hopefully I can check the second.
So check it out.
One.
We're picking up where we left off in 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 5. So, but it's fun.
Ooh, 1 Kings. There's some good stuff in there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Appreciate y'all joining. before I wrap up the stream, hold on. Where's the? There it is. Okay. Here's the quick reminder that I don't know how to end my show.